She stood at the entrance of her own son's wedding in a navy blue dress, while inside the reception hall, the woman who had called her a burden 3 months earlier was trying to explain to 200 guests why she'd been lying the whole time. Marcus was at that wedding too. I know because he called me from the parking lot afterward, voice shaking to tell me the caterer had walked out mid-setup. Turns out the caterer was a woman I'd done business with for 11 years. She heard what Candace had posted about me online. She put down her chafing dishes and left. I didn't ask her to do that, but I can't say I was sorry.
If you're watching this video, tell me where you're from or what time it is for you. I want to be clear about something before I say anything else. I am not a victim. I was not naive. I was not some sweet old woman who just didn't see it coming. I am 62 years old. I spent 31 years in freight logistics, and I built a company from a spare bedroom and a fax machine. I know how to read a situation. I know when numbers don't add up. I know when someone is running a game. What I did not know, what I was slower to understand than I would like to admit, is that you can see every single warning sign clearly and still walk straight into the thing you were trying to avoid. Because the one person you trusted most was the one doing the leading. His name is Marcus. He is 38 years old. He is my son. And for the better part of 2 years, I watched him become someone I did not recognize. And I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself it was just marriage, just adjustment, just the natural pulling away that happens when a grown man builds a life with someone new. I told myself all of that because the alternative, that the child I had chosen, fought for, and rebuilt my entire life around had quietly decided I was nothing, was not something I was ready to face. Until the morning he made me face it at the door of his wedding, in front of 2 people checking off names on a clipboard, while I stood there in a dress I had bought 6 weeks earlier for exactly this occasion. That was the morning everything changed, not just between Marcus and me, everything. I was 28 when I adopted him. I was newly divorced, living in a 2-bedroom apartment in Atlanta, working night dispatch at a freight brokerage. I had gone through the application process alone, which meant I had to work twice as hard to convince the caseworkers that a single woman without a second income was a stable enough placement. I took parenting classes on my lunch breaks. I submitted character references from my pastor and 2 supervisors. I waited 8 months. The day I drove to Memphis to pick him up, I had already decided I was not going to cry at the group home. I thought it might scare him. He was 4 years old. He was wearing a shirt that was too big for him and holding a paper cup, the kind with a wax coating that comes with a juice box. I later found out from the caseworker that he had been carrying it since the morning they told him someone was coming for him. He held it like it was something that mattered. On the drive back to Atlanta, he sat in the car seat in the back and did not say a word for the first 90 minutes. Then he asked if he could have some of my water. I said, of course. He took 1 sip, handed it back very carefully with both hands, and said, thank you. I kept that paper cup for 7 years. It sat on a shelf in my kitchen next to the coffee maker. Eventually, it just disintegrated from age. But I kept it as long as I could because it was the first thing he'd ever trusted me with. I want you to hold on to that, because everything that comes after gets complicated, and I do not want you to lose track of who we were to each other before it did. By the time Marcus graduated with his business degree, I was not the woman he thought he knew financially. He thought he knew the story. He thought I was a woman who had scraped and stretched and made things work month to month. He had watched me clip coupons when he was in middle school. He had seen me drive the same car for 12 years. He had grown up thinking that every good thing we had required sacrifice, because it did. For a long time, it genuinely did. What he did not know was what happened in my early 40s. I had started my own freight brokerage in 2002, out of the knowledge I had accumulated working for other people for over a decade. I was not flashy about it. I kept my expenses low, I worked referrals hard, and I built slowly. By 2012, the company had 17 employees and contracts with 4 regional distributors. In 2018, I sold it. I will not tell you the number. What I will tell you is that it was enough. Enough that I never had to work again if I didn't want to. Enough that the investments I made in the years after the sale generated more per year than most people earn at a job. I did not tell Marcus. I kept living the same way I always had. Same modest house in the same neighborhood. Same 12-year-old car, now 15 years old. I cooked at home. I bought clothes when things wore out. I was not performing modesty. I genuinely had no interest in changing my life in ways that would draw attention, but I was quietly making things easier for Marcus. I co-signed his lease when he moved out, and his credit history wasn't strong enough. I backed a small line of credit he used when he started doing independent contracting work on the side. I owned a rental property, a small house, that he used as a home office, and I charged him far below market rate. I called in a favor to get him introduced to his first major contracting client. He thought he had done all of that himself, and I let him think it, because I believed that a man who thought he had built something would take better care of it than a man who knew it had been handed to him. That was my mistake, not the helping, the silence. I am going to be honest about Candace, because I do not want to paint her as a cartoon. She was smart. She was organized. She had a good eye for detail, and she was better at reading a room than almost anyone I have ever met. When Marcus brought her home the first time, she made all the right gestures. She brought a bottle of wine. She complimented the house. She asked about the photos on the wall. But here is what I noticed, because I am a woman who notices things. In 4 separate dinners over the first 3 months, Candace asked Marcus questions. She asked my neighbor Dolores questions when Dolores stopped by once. She asked the man at the wine shop questions when we all went out together one evening. She did not ask me a single question. Not one. Not what I did for a living. Not how long I had lived in Atlanta. Not how Marcus and I had met. Meaning the adoption story, which most people find interesting. Not what I was reading. Not whether I had siblings. Not what I thought about anything. She looked at me and she talked near me, and she was always perfectly pleasant. But she never once looked at me like I was a person whose inner life might be worth knowing. I told myself I was being uncharitable, that she was nervous, that it would take time. But I am 62 years old. I have been in enough rooms with enough people to know the difference between nervous and indifferent. Candace was not nervous around me. She was just not interested. That was the first wrong thing. Everything after, it was just the same thing getting louder. For most of Marcus's life, he called me every Sunday morning. Not for long, usually 10-15 minutes. He would tell me what he had going on that week. I would tell him if anything was happening with me. We would complain about whatever was in the news. It was nothing dramatic. It was just how we stayed close. The calls started getting shorter in the fall of the year after he met Candace. Then they started getting less frequent, every other week, then once a month. Then I realized at some point that I was the one initiating most of them, and when I stopped to see what would happen, 3 weeks went by without a word. What bothered me more than the silence was what happened when we did talk. He stopped mentioning Candace by name. Early on, everything was Candace this and Candace that. He was proud of her, happy, and he wanted me to know it. But after a certain point, she disappeared from our conversations entirely. He would refer to things the two of them had done without naming her. He would say we and not explain who he was. I am not a woman who forces herself into conversations she isn't wanted in. I did not push. I did not call Candace directly. I did not ask Marcus what was happening between him and me, because I knew if I did, he would say nothing was happening, and then we would both be standing there knowing that was not true. What I did was pay attention. I kept a log, not obsessively, just notes I made in my phone, dates. What was said? What was conspicuously not said? Later, that habit would matter. He called me on a Thursday and said he was making dinner Saturday and did I want to come? I said yes. I brought a sweet potato pie because he liked it, and I had not seen him in almost 6 weeks. I pulled up to his building and noticed 2 cars parked out front that I didn't recognize. I thought maybe some of his friends were there. I knocked. Candace answered, which was normal enough. But the moment I stepped inside and saw the configuration of the room, 4 people already seated, her parents on one side, her sister and brother-in-law on the other, Marcus standing near the kitchen looking like a man waiting for something. I understood what I had walked into. Candace's mother stood up and said something like, "Oh, you must be Marcus's mom. We've heard so much." She was warm in the way that people are warm when they have been briefed on you and have decided you are not a threat. Candace held up her hand. The ring was already on it. Had been on it, probably, since before I arrived. "Surprise," Marcus said. He was smiling, but he could not fully meet my eyes. I smiled. I congratulated them. I hugged Candace, who returned it briefly and then pulled back. I shook her father's hand. I said all the right things. I stayed for dinner, and I did not let my face do anything I would regret. Candace's mother asked me what I did. When I said I was retired, she nodded and said, "How lovely," in a tone that meant she had no further questions. I drove home and sat in the parking garage attached to my building for almost half an hour. I was not crying. I was just sitting with the thing that had just happened. They had planned an event that required my son's mother to be there. They had invited everyone in his life who mattered, except they hadn't told me, because they had decided I was not the kind of presence they wanted to build the memory around. I was there to receive the announcement, not to be part of it. I started the car. I went upstairs. I called my attorney Raymond and told him I wanted to do a quiet review of every financial arrangement I had in Marcus's name. I wasn't doing anything with that information yet. I just wanted to know what I had. A few weeks after the engagement dinner, Marcus called. He said the wedding would be small. Immediate family, close friends. He said it in the easy voice of someone who assumes you already know the thing they are telling you, which meant Candace had probably told him to make the call and he had waited until he could do it, while he was distracted by something else. I said that sounded nice. I asked when they were thinking. He gave me a date, 7 months out. I marked it on my calendar. I did not ask about a role in the planning. I knew better. What I did was wait to be invited into some part of it. A fitting, a venue walkthrough, a dinner where we talked about the guest list. Something small. One moment where I was included as his mother rather than managed as an obligation. That moment never came. The few times I mentioned the wedding in conversation, Candace was the one who responded, even if I had addressed Marcus directly. "We're still finalizing things. We'll let you know." Once she said, in a tone that was technically pleasant, "We really want it to feel curated." I did not ask what that meant. I understood what it meant. I bought the dress anyway, navy blue, fitted, the kind of dress you wear when something matters. I bought it 3 months before the wedding. I put it in the back of my closet and I told myself I was being prepared, not foolish. 4 days before the wedding, Marcus called in the middle of the afternoon. I was in the middle of reviewing some paperwork, nothing relevant, just administrative things. And when I saw his name, I set everything down and answered on the second ring. My heart did a thing. I am not too proud to admit that. I thought it was the call. The one where he said, "Mom, I should have been clearer, I want you there." What he actually said was, "Hey, so Candace's aunt is flying in the morning of the wedding. She's landing at Hartsfield at 9. Any chance you could pick her up?" I did not say anything right away. He kept talking to fill the quiet. He gave me the flight number. He said she would have 2 bags. He mentioned that Candace's aunt went by Miss Yvonne and preferred people not abbreviate it. At some point in his talking, I realized he was not telling me I wasn't on the guest list. He was assuming I already knew. He was calling because he needed something, the same way you call a neighbor when you need someone to take in your mail. He had categorized me so completely that calling to ask a favor required no preface, no acknowledgement, no nothing. I said, "Marcus, am I on the guest list for the wedding?" He went quiet. "Mom, am I on the list?" There was a pause that I counted. It was 4 seconds. "We kept it really small," he said. I said I understood. I said I would not be available to pick up Miss Yvonne. I said goodbye, and I set the phone down on the counter and stood there for what felt like a long time, looking at the navy blue dress hanging on the back of my closet door where I could see it from the kitchen. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept replaying the call, looking for the version of it where I had misheard him. There wasn't one. The morning of the wedding, I got up early. I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table with it, and I thought about what a reasonable person would do. A reasonable person would stay home. A reasonable person would spend the day doing something else, something normal, something that would not put her in a position to be turned away at a door. I am a reasonable person. I also knew, sitting at that table, that if I did not go, I would spend the rest of my life wondering if Marcus would have softened when he saw me. If some part of him, the part that still remembered the paper cup and the Sunday calls and the years of my working to give him everything I could, if some part of him would have changed his mind in the moment. I needed to know. I put on the dress. I did my hair the way I do when something matters. I called a rideshare. On the drive over, I watched the city go by through the window, and I kept my hands folded in my lap, and I did not think too hard about what I was about to do. The venue was a converted warehouse in Buckhead that someone had done expensive things to. There was a long table near the entrance with 2 young women behind it and printed guest lists in front of them. There were flowers everywhere. I could hear music from inside. I walked up and gave my name. The first woman looked down the list, then looked again, then glanced at the second woman in a way that did not require translation. "I'm Marcus's mother," I said. The second woman said she would be right back. She went to get someone. The someone turned out to be Marcus. He came through the side entrance in his tuxedo. He looked good. He always cleaned up well. I noticed that before anything else, which tells you something about how a mother's mind works even when it is breaking. He walked over, and his face was not surprised. That was the part that landed hardest. Not what he said, but the fact that he looked exactly like a man who had known this moment was coming and had decided in advance how to handle it. Controlled, flat, like a manager dealing with a situation. "Mom, what are you doing here?" "I came to the wedding," I said. I kept my voice even. "My name isn't on the list. There must be an error." "There's no error." "Marcus, I told you. We kept it small." I said, "I am your mother." He exhaled, not loudly, not theatrically, just the exhale of a man who has run out of patience for a conversation. "I know," he said, "but this is what Candace and I decided." Right at that moment, Candace appeared in the doorway behind him. She was in her gown. She was beautiful. The moment she saw me, her expression did what it always did, tightened around the eyes, composure locked into place like a door closing. She said to Marcus, not to me, "Is everything okay?" Marcus said, "She's just heading out." That was the sentence, not spoken to me, about me, as if I were a logistical issue being resolved. "She's just heading out." I could have made a scene. I could have raised my voice. I could have said everything I had been accumulating for 2 years. Instead, I smiled. Not a warm smile, just a controlled one. The smile of a woman who has decided she does not need this moment to go any particular way to know exactly what she's going to do next. "Of course," I said. "Congratulations to you both. Have a beautiful wedding." I turned around and walked back toward the street. I took out my phone and called Raymond. He picked up on the second ring. I said, "It's time to start. All of it." He said, "Renata, you sure?" I said, "He looked at me like I was somebody who needed to be managed. So yes, I'm sure." I heard him exhale slowly on the other end. "All right," he said. "Give me 48 hours. I got in a rideshare. My phone started going off almost immediately. Not Marcus, not a call, not an apology. Text messages from Candace. I know because the first one read, "Who gave you the right to show up without an invitation?" I set the phone face down on the seat and watched Atlanta go by out the window all the way home. I want to explain how this worked because I think people sometimes imagine it as dramatic. It was not dramatic. It was methodical. Over the next 8 days, with Raymond guiding the legal side, I began withdrawing every silent support I had been providing Marcus's life. The co-signed lease had a clause that tied my guarantorship to an annual renewal. I simply did not renew. Without the guarantor, the lease went into technical default, which triggered a notice period. Marcus would receive official paperwork from the property management company explaining that his guarantor had withdrawn and that his standing would need to be reassessed. The line of credit I had backed for his contracting work was canceled, not dramatically. The bank sent a standard letter. The rental property where Marcus kept his home office had been rented to him at $600 a month, which was less than half what the market would have supported. I informed him in writing through Raymond that the lease would not renew and that the property would be listed at market rate. I also made a call to Terrence, the client I had originally introduced Marcus to years ago. I did not ask Terrence to do anything. I simply let him know that I was stepping back from any involvement in Marcus's professional life and that any future relationship would be entirely between the two of them. Terrence knew what that meant. We had been doing business together since 2005. None of this felt good. I want to be clear about that. It did not feel like power. It felt like carefully removing stitches that had been keeping a wound closed, knowing it would bleed. But I had spent 2 years watching Marcus treat the things I provided as permanent furniture, as features of the landscape of his life that existed, whether he maintained the relationship behind them or not. I had watched him accept the benefits of my support while allowing Candace to treat me like an inconvenience to be managed. I had watched him stand at a door and look through me. I was not punishing him. I was simply stopping something that was no longer appropriate to continue. I went about my days very quietly. I took long walks in the mornings. I started going to a watercolor class on Tuesday evenings that I had registered for the week after the wedding, mostly to make sure I had somewhere to be. Marcus called 11 days after the wedding. He did not call to apologize. I want to be precise about that. He called because the lease default notice had arrived and he wanted to know what I was going to do about it. "Mom, I got paperwork from the management company. What did you do?" "I didn't renew my guarantorship. That's in the lease agreement." "You can't just—" He stopped. "Candace and I have a lease." "You have a lease that required a guarantor because your credit history couldn't support it alone. I was the guarantor. I've stepped back. The management company will explain your options." There was a long pause. "This is about the wedding. This is about what was always going to happen if you stopped being my son," I said. "I've been providing things quietly for years, Marcus. That made sense when we were in a relationship. We are not in a relationship right now." He hung up. I sat with the silence for a minute. Then Donna called. Donna had been my accountant for 15 years. She had handled my books through the sale of the company and everything after. She knew, better than almost anyone, the full shape of my finances and what I had been doing for Marcus over the years. She said, "I heard what happened. A mutual friend of ours mentioned it. I'm sorry." I thanked her. She said, "I want to offer you something. I can put together a summary document. Not for legal purposes, just a clean accounting of every financial arrangement you've had in Marcus's name over the past 8 years. Amounts, dates, what it supported. Organized and clear." I asked why. She paused. "Because I have a feeling," she said, "that at some point someone is going to say you were a controlling woman who held your son captive with money. And if that happens, you should have something factual and organized that tells the other story." I said yes, not because I knew what I would use it for. Just because Donna's instincts were usually right, and I had learned over 15 years to trust them, that document would become the most important piece of paper in the months that followed. 3 weeks after the wedding, Candace posted. It was not impulsive. I know because I have read it many times. It had the structure of something that had been thought through, not legally, but rhetorically. She knew what emotions she was trying to activate. She knew who her audience was. She wrote that her mother-in-law had sabotaged their lease out of jealousy, that she had spent years playing poor while secretly having money and using it to control her son, and that after failing to ruin their wedding by showing up uninvited, she was now trying to destroy their marriage. She said she was scared. She said she did not understand how a mother could do this to her own child's happiness. She attached a wedding photo, the two of them radiant, laughing at something. The caption read, "She tried to ruin this. We won't let her. She tagged my full name." Within 6 hours, it had been shared more than 400 times. By the next morning, the number was in the thousands. The comments were the kind of comments that collect around a story like this. People who had waited their whole lives to have a villain to direct things at. Toxic, controlling, jealous old woman. Somebody ought to check on that boy. I found out because my friend Beverly texted me a screenshot with 3 question marks. I read it. I read it again. I put my phone down and finished the cup of tea I had been drinking. Then I picked up the phone and called Raymond. Then I called Donna and asked her to expedite the summary document. Then I texted Beverly and said, "I need to tell my side. Can you help me think through how?" Beverly ran a large online community for Black women over 50. She had moderated it for 7 years. She understood how information moved and where it landed. She said she would come over the next afternoon. I want to tell you what it actually felt like to read Candace's post, not the clean version, the real one. The first pass through, I was looking for factual errors to get angry about, which is what you do when you're trying to stay on top of something. I found them. Almost every sentence had some distortion. Things taken out of context, things reframed, one outright fabrication about me showing up screaming at the wedding, which did not happen and which no one who was there would corroborate. The second pass through, I stopped looking for errors and just read it as a stranger would. As someone who knew nothing about me and nothing about Marcus and was encountering this story fresh. And what I felt, reading it that way, was something closer to grief than anger. Because she had taken the real thing, the real story, which was about a woman who had poured her whole adult life into raising a child who had decided to leave her at a door, and she had turned it into something ugly and small. She had made me the perpetrator of a crime I did not commit, and she had done it in a way that would be believed by thousands of people who would never know any better. That hurt more than the wedding door. The door was one moment. This was my story being rewritten without my permission while I sat at home drinking tea. I did not comment on the post. I did not call Marcus. I went to bed at my usual time. In the morning, I went to my watercolor class. The woman next to me was working on a landscape with too much blue in it, and we had a long conversation about how to know when you've gone too far and whether you can bring a color back once it's dominated the whole canvas. Beverly came over that afternoon and we sat at my kitchen table for 3 hours, planning what I was going to say. Beverly helped me write something careful, not angry, not performative, just accurate. I laid out the adoption story in plain language. I explained what I had provided financially and why. I described the pattern of exclusion I had experienced over the prior 2 years. I attached photographs of specific receipts, not all of them, just enough to make the point. I included a portion of the summary document Donna had prepared. I addressed Candace's claims one by one, in order with specificity. Beverly read it through twice and said, "This is good. This is really good. Post it tonight." I uploaded it. I attached the documents. I hit submit. 2 hours later, I got a notification that my account had been flagged for review and the post was not visible pending a policy investigation. Candace's friends, I found out later through Beverly's network, had organized a mass reporting effort the moment they saw I had an account. They reported the post for harassment and targeted behavior before most people had even had a chance to read it. The platform put my account in a hold status, 72 hours minimum. I will not pretend that didn't cost me something. Those 3 days, Candace's version was the only version. People were sharing it with new captions, new commentary, new layers of outrage added on top of outrage. By the time my account was restored, the story had traveled to places and audiences that my response would never reach. Beverly said, "We can still do this. It's just going to take longer." I said I knew. I went to my Tuesday watercolor class. I did not look at my phone more than twice. The Saturday my account was still frozen, I went to a quarterly luncheon that I co-chair for a women's professional organization I've been part of for 9 years. I almost didn't go. I was tired. But I had a co-chairing responsibility, and I am not a woman who cancels on obligations. I walked in and immediately knew that people knew. You can feel when a room has information about you. The greetings were a few degrees warmer than usual, which meant people were compensating for something they'd seen and didn't know how to address. About 30 minutes into the lunch, one of the members, a direct woman named Sylvia, who I have always appreciated for not performing diplomacy, she doesn't mean, leaned over and said quietly, "Renata, I saw what that girl posted about you. I want to hear your side if you want to give it." Before I could answer, I noticed a woman at the far end of the table who I had not seen at the previous quarter's meeting. She was well dressed, Candace's coloring, Candace's eyes. She was introduced to me before I could place it. Sandra, Candace's mother. She had recently joined. She did not know I recognized the resemblance. She smiled at me with the warm, practiced smile of a woman who had been told good things. I took out the summary document Donna had prepared. It was 8 pages, organized by year, with dollar amounts and account descriptions, and a brief notation of purpose for each item. I did not wave it around. I placed it on the table in front of Sylvia and said quietly, "This is what I actually did for them." Sylvia read the first 2 pages. Her face changed. She passed it to the woman next to her. By the time it reached Sandra, 4 other women had read through at least part of it. Sandra picked it up with an expression that still expected it to be something innocuous. I watched her read. I watched her stop. I watched her read the same line twice. She looked up at me. I said nothing. I did not need to say anything. The table had gone very quiet. Someone refilled a water glass. Someone else folded her napkin twice. Sandra set the document down carefully, like it was something that needed to be handled gently, and said, "I had no idea." "No," I said. She made sure of that. That was the first moment the story stopped being Candace's story. There were 200 people at the luncheon, and 9 of them sat at my table that afternoon, and every one of them went home that evening with a different understanding of what had happened. Sandra went home to call her daughter. I know because Candace called Marcus that night and told him she needed to talk. The platform restored my account on a Tuesday morning. My post went up at 7:45. By 9, Beverly's network had begun sharing it. By noon, it had more engagement than Candace's original post at its peak. Not because I was more dramatic, because I had documentation, and documentation changes the nature of a conversation. I did not post audio recordings. I did not go live. I did not call anyone out by name in a theatrical way. I simply posted the account, the timeline, the documents, and one photograph, the paper cup. I had a picture of it from years ago, sitting on the shelf in my kitchen. I did not explain the photograph in the caption. I wrote, "He was 4 years old. He held on to this the whole drive home. I held on to him for 34 years. The rest of the post explained what came after. That photograph got shared more than anything else. Candace made a strategic error. 2 days after my post went up, she went live on video to rebut it. She had talking points. She had prepared. But she was also rattled. Her mother had called her apparently, and the conversation had not gone well. And it showed. She contradicted herself twice about the timeline of events. She made a claim about my presence at the wedding that 3 people in the comments immediately said was inaccurate because they had been there. She cried, which she had probably calculated would generate sympathy, but the comments were not sympathetic in the way she needed them to be. People had read my post. They had seen the documents. The most shared clip from her live video was 40 seconds of her trying to explain why none of the financial documents I'd posted were relevant. She could not complete the argument. She kept starting it and then stopping. I did not respond to the live. I watched about 15 minutes of it, made a cup of tea, and went to bed. I will tell you what happened to them because it matters, but I am going to say it plainly and without taking pleasure in it, because taking pleasure in the suffering of someone you once loved is not something I have the energy for. The lease situation resolved the way Raymond said it would. Without the guarantor, Marcus could not maintain the apartment on his income alone, especially once 2 of his contracting clients chose not to renew their agreements. He did not lose those clients because I made a call. He lost them because they had seen the documentation I posted and drawn their own conclusions about what kind of professional judgment he exercised. One of them sent me a brief email. I thanked him and did not encourage anything further. The rental property, Marcus's home office, went on the market at $1,100 a month. Marcus did not apply. Candace's employer saw the documentation. She worked in a marketing role at a mid-sized company that prided itself, publicly and loudly, on values language. The documented gap between how she had described their family situation online and what the paper trail showed was apparently a problem for someone in HR. She did not lose her job, but she did not get the promotion she had been up for. Sandra, Candace's mother, called me twice. The first call I let go to voicemail. The second call I answered. She did not make excuses. She said she had known something was not right and had told herself it was not her place. She said she was sorry. I believed her. I told her I appreciated the call and that I hoped her daughter would find some steadiness. The defamation question, Candace's online post had contained at least 2 factually false statements, was something Raymond had flagged early. We did not pursue it aggressively. We sent a formal letter requesting a correction and a brief public acknowledgement of the inaccuracies. Candace's attorney negotiated the language. The acknowledgement was short and clearly written by a lawyer, but it was there, on record, on the same platform where the original post had gone. I donated the small settlement that accompanied it to an organization that supports women in the foster system. It was not a large amount. It was the right place for it to go. 7 weeks after everything had settled, I received a letter at Raymond's office. Raymond called me to say it had arrived and asked if I wanted him to read it first. I said no. He scanned it and emailed it to me. It was 2 pages handwritten, Marcus's handwriting, which I know as well as I know my own. He did not ask for forgiveness. He was specific about that. He wrote early in the letter, "I am not writing to ask you to forgive me, because I don't think I've earned the right to ask that." He wrote that he had spent most of the previous weeks trying to understand how he had gotten to the place where turning his mother away at a door had seemed like a reasonable thing to do. He wrote that he did not have a clean answer. He wrote that Candace and he were separated. He wrote it plainly without assigning blame, which told me more about his current state of mind than anything else. He wrote that the hardest thing he had done in the past few months was trying to look at the last several years clearly and identify what he had actually built himself versus what had been built for him. He said he was still doing that work and he wasn't sure it would ever fully be done. At the end, he wrote, "I hope you're okay. I mean that without any agenda. I just want to know that you're okay." I read the letter 4 times over the course of a day. I did not call him. I wrote back, also by hand, 2 sentences. "I am okay. I love you and I always will. And the door I kept open for 34 years is closed now. And that is not the same thing as hating you." I sealed it, addressed it to his current apartment. I knew the address through Raymond, and mailed it from the post office 2 blocks from my building. I walked home in the late afternoon and stopped at a bakery and bought a slice of cake for no particular reason and ate it at the counter while people moved around me. I thought about the paper cup. I thought about the drive from Memphis. I thought about who we had been to each other at the very beginning, before the world got complicated, before Candace, before the years of my providing things I should have made him ask for plainly before all of it. I held that version of him for a while, and then I finished the cake and went home. I live in Savannah now. I had always wanted to live near water. I put it off for years, first for Marcus's school stability, then for the company, then out of simple inertia, the kind that builds up when you spend too long living for things other than yourself. I found an apartment that looks out over the marsh. In the mornings, I drink my coffee on the balcony and watch the light change over the water, and I do not, for the first time in a very long time, feel like I am waiting for something. The watercolor class here is better than the one in Atlanta. My instructor is a 70-year-old Haitian woman named Marguerite, who does not believe in timidity, and who told me on my third session that I had good instincts, but I was being too careful with my colors. I am working on that. I volunteer twice a month with an organization that provides support to women in the foster system. Practical things, not just money. Helping people navigate paperwork, find resources, understand their options. I am useful there in ways that have nothing to do with what I have in the bank. Raymond continues to handle a few remaining administrative matters. There is not much left to handle. Beverly visits next month. We are going to drive up the coast and eat seafood somewhere and probably talk too much and laugh at things that are not that funny, and it is going to be very good. Sandra, Candace's mother, sends me a brief message every few weeks. Nothing heavy. Sometimes just a word about the weather or a book she is reading. I write back. I do not know what that is or what it will become. I do not need to know yet. Marcus is in therapy. Raymond heard this through a practical channel. There was a piece of correspondence that referenced it in passing. I was glad to hear it. I mean that without irony. Whatever he is working through, I hope it goes somewhere useful for him. I hope he builds something real this time, something he can actually point to and say, I made that. That came from me. I do not regret the adoption. I want to be precise about that. I do not regret 1 year of it. Not one sacrifice, not one Sunday morning call or middle of the night worry or moment of working extra hours so he could have something I didn't. Those were acts of love and they were worth doing. The fact that they did not produce the outcome I hoped for does not make them wrong. What I regret is the silence, not the generosity. The silence around it. I spent years providing things and not naming them, not saying, this is what I am doing for you, and it requires that you see me. It requires that you treat me like a person and not a resource. I thought the giving would speak for itself. It didn't. I should have spoken. That is the lesson I would give any woman who finds herself in a similar place. Not to stop giving, not to close down, but to name the thing, to say out loud, this is what I am offering, and this is what I need in return. Because love without language becomes invisible, and invisible things get taken for granted, and taken for granted things get used until they run out. I did not run out. I stepped back. And on the other side of stepping back, I found something I had not expected. Room. Room to breathe. Room to want things for myself again. Room to figure out, at 62 years old, what a morning looks like when it belongs entirely to you. The light over the marsh is extraordinary at 7 in the morning. I have tried 3 times to paint it and failed 3 times. Marguerite says that is not failure. She says that is learning to look. I think she's right. I think that is what all of this has been. Learning to look. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.